My name is Sandy. Sometimes I feel like I've lived several different lives, even though my passport says I'm only 38. Now I have my own antiques business, cozy, profitable, with a loyal clientele, the scent of old wood and polished silver, the soft light in the display cases, and the rustling pages of ancient books that I tirelessly leaf through, as if trying to read my own destiny between the lines. But it wasn't always this way. Once upon a time, it all began very differently, with naive hopes and shared dreams, with my ex-husband, with whom, as it seemed then, my adult life began. We started this business together, from scratch, literally out of nowhere, where even the first rented storefront seemed like a miracle, and then, years later, it all ended, the marriage, the illusions, and that shaky feeling that there was a partner by my side, heading in the same direction. The divorce happened 3 years ago, and the court, with its cold precision, divided everything in half. Half the work for him, half for me. At this point, many thought I should have given up, shrugged my shoulders, felt sorry for myself, and quietly thanked fate for at least a small share. But instead of letting resentment and exhaustion consume me, I took what was left and turned it into my second wind. I lived for work, literally sleeping in the store, learning everything all over again, boosting online sales, traveling to estate sales in 3 states, digging through dusty basements and attics of old houses in search of treasures that others considered junk. Those 3 years were both punishment and salvation for me. It was hard, to the point of tears, sleepless nights, and the constant feeling of walking on thin ice, but it was then that I realized what I was capable of when I was alone. Now my business brings in more than I could have ever imagined when we first started, but with success came expectations, quiet, sticky, like a spider's web. My family was used to me being reliable: Mom, Dad, my younger brother Jake, who's 35, and my sister Emma, 6 years younger. It was as if they'd forgotten that I had limits too. Every month, I paid my parents' mortgage, $2,800. Like clockwork, add to that the medical bills, which were mounting faster than grass after rain. My dad has diabetes, my mom has arthritis, and the insurance, of course, was terrible. And then Jake. Jesus, Jake, he bought himself a fancy truck a couple of years ago, huge and shiny, like a symbol of who he wanted to be but wasn't, and guess who ended up paying his mortgage? Another $650 every month from my account. Emma, she actually lived in an apartment downtown, so nice and bright, with a balcony and a view of the park. The rent was almost $2,000. I worked in marketing, but as it turned out, working and supporting myself weren't the same thing, and so I pulled out my wallet again. In total, I was spending over $5,000 a month just to keep my family afloat, and I'd explained it to myself: that's what families do. I have it, they don't, it all makes sense. Until one day, on an ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday, I was sitting in my store at my computer, sorting through invoices and delivery notes. The sun was streaming through the window, dust particles were slowly swirling in the air, all was calm, and then, a notification of a new email, from my mom. Subject: anniversary gift ideas. I smiled, expecting something nice, maybe dinner. Maybe a bouquet of roses for her and Dad, but when I opened the email, I realized I was mistaken. Before me was a list that looked like an accountant's nightmare. The top section looked innocuous enough: a kitchen set, a coffee maker, a microwave, a few pillows. Next to it, a note: for purchase by Jake and Emma, all together, maybe $600. And below that, a second section, signed with my name, 3 items: a trip to the Maldives for 2 for $15,000, a new car, and diamond earrings. I reread the letter 3 times, then again, slowly, word by word, as if my brain simply refused to accept the information. My parents wanted me to give them one of these special treats, and my brother and sister were planning to buy a coffee maker. My head spun, everything inside me seemed to sink. I felt a sickness, a quiet, tugging feeling, as if reality had suddenly taken a step back. I closed my laptop, told my assistant I was leaving early, and stepped outside, where the air was thick as syrup and smelled of exhaust fumes and dust. I drove home, barely feeling the road, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and thought how strange it is sometimes that notions of love, duty, and gratitude collapse, not loudly, but in a whisper, through a single email. At home, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, looking out the window where the occasional drops of rain were settling on the glass, and felt everything inside me tighten into a tight, icy lump. I brewed myself some mint tea, watching the steam rise above the mug, and tried to convince myself that it was all just a misunderstanding, that maybe Mom was joking, had written the letter in a hurry, had worded something incorrectly, and I simply misunderstood. I took a sip, the tea burned my lips. But it didn't warm me up. Taking a deep breath, I dialed her number, hoping that talking would clear things up. "Hi, Mom, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Sandy," she responded with a cheerful tone, as if she'd been expecting my call. "Oh, I'm so glad you called. Did you get my letter? We're so excited about our anniversary." "Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about," I replied, feeling my heart pounding in my throat. I read the gift list, and well, Mom, there must have been some kind of mistake. "Oh, wonderful," she said, her voice ringing with anticipation. "I was hoping you'd call. Dad and I are so thrilled, everything's going so well." I clutched the mug with both hands. "Mom, I can't buy such expensive things, a trip to the Maldives, a new car that's tens of thousands of dollars." Her voice changed instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. "Sandy, stop exaggerating, you have a successful business, everything is going brilliantly, these gifts won't even leave your wallet." I took a deep breath, trying to speak calmly, but a wave of resentment was already rising in my chest. "Okay," I said, "I want to do something nice for you and Dad, choose one gift from the list, I'll buy it." And suddenly she laughed, not happily, not lovingly, but as if I'd said something ridiculous, childish. "Oh, darling, you're being silly," she said softly, but coldly, "those aren't options, we need all three." I fell silent. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my breathing and the distant sound of rain outside the window. "All three?" I asked, barely managing to get the words out. "Mom, are you serious?" "Of course, your dad, Jake, and Emma and I discussed it all. Everyone agreed it would be appropriate." "Appropriate?" I repeated, feeling my hands begin to shake. "Mom, it's over $50,000. "So," she replied sharply, "Sandy, you owe us, we gave you life, raised you, supported you, and now it's your time to take proper care of us." I gripped the edge of the table. "Mom, I've been working since I was 16, I went to college on a scholarship, and I built my business from scratch with my ex-husband, you didn't pay for any of it." "Don't you dare talk to me like that," she screamed, "you're ungrateful, arrogant, and greedy, after everything we've done for you." "Mom," I tried to hold back my tears, "I pay your mortgage and your medical bills every month." "It's the least you can do," she snapped, "and if you don't give us what we want, you don't have to come to the party, you're not invited." The line went dead, just short beeps and silence. I sat staring at my phone, as if it could explain how a single conversation could ruin something that seemed eternal. An hour passed, the phone suddenly came to life, vibrated, and lit up with a series of notifications. Messages poured in one after another. "Jake, Kim, what's wrong with you? Just buy them a gift." "Emma, seriously? Are you going to be selfish about their anniversary?" "Jake again, you make a ton of money, why is it so hard to do that for your parents?" "Emma, they raised us, it's their 40th anniversary, Kim, a little respect wouldn't hurt." I stared at the screen, everything inside me went blank. I felt no anger or pain, only a fatigue so thick it was hard to breathe. I put the phone down, opened my laptop, and scrolled through emails until I found the reservation, the very restaurant downtown where their party was supposed to be, 30 people, a $3,000 deposit, everything already arranged. I looked at the date, 3 weeks until the event, and suddenly I realized I didn't want to go, didn't want to stand next to people calling me greedy just because I refused to buy myself a new roll, that of family ATM. I dialed the restaurant's number. "Good evening," I said evenly, "I need to cancel a reservation under the name Morrison." Of course, ma'am, the receptionist replied politely, there will be a 30% cancellation fee. Fine, I said and hung up. Then I opened my banking app. It was time to stop, that's it, once and for all. I clicked cancel next to my parents' mortgage payment, click, cancel for Jake's truck, click, cancel for Emma's rent, click. I took screenshots of each transaction, compiled them into a single message, and sent it to the family chat. I signed it, since I'm so selfish and greedy, I guess you don't need my money anymore. Then I turned off my phone, put my now cold tea in the sink, and went to the bedroom. The house was silent, except for the rain pounding the roof, and for the first time in years, I went to bed feeling like I wasn't someone's responsibility anymore. When I woke up in the morning, I didn't even immediately realize where I was. It was unusually quiet, no one wrote, called, asked for help or money, but as soon as I reached for my phone, the screen lit up with an avalanche of notifications, as if the night had passed accompanied by my family's hysteria, missed calls, dozens of messages, voicemails, all jumbled into an endless chorus of reproaches, complaints, and accusations. Mom, of course, was the first. Sandy, what have you done? Call me right now. Dad, short and cold, this is outrageous, you can't just abandon your family. From Jake came several in a row, are you crazy? I have to pay the truck tomorrow. And from Emma, panic, direct and unvarnished, Kim, I'm getting evicted. You can't just stop paying my rent. I scrolled through it all and felt neither guilt nor regret, only a lightness, as if a stone I'd carried around for years and considered part of myself had been removed. Dad wrote again, we are your family, that's not how it should be. Emma finished the sentence, Mom's crying, Dad's having chest pains, are you happy now? I put the phone on the table, took a deep breath, and suddenly realized that for the first time in years, I had a morning without worry, no other people's bills, no urgent transfers, no rescue operations called family debt. I made myself some coffee, added a little cinnamon, just the way I like it, and even smiled. It was strange, a feeling of freedom and guilt mixed together, but still, inside, I felt lighter than ever. At 10 o'clock, there was a bang on the door, loud, confident, with such desperation that a chill ran down my spine. Sandy! Open up! We need to talk. Mom's voice sounded as if she were just steps away from a breakdown. I went to the window and, pulling back the curtain, saw them all, Mom, Dad, Jake, Emma, they're standing on my porch, as if an entire delegation had come to restore the old order. Mom has a handkerchief in her hand, Dad is clutching his cap, Jake looks down with his arms crossed, Emma is clearly on the verge of tears. I don't want to talk, I shouted through the door, you've said it all. Please, dear, Dad intervened, let's just work this out. There's nothing to work out, I replied, you've made it clear who I am to you. Emma couldn't take it anymore. Kim. I'll be evicted, do you understand? I'll have nowhere to live. Maybe you should find a job that pays for real effort, I said, feeling my weariness give way to irritation. I'm not joking, she screamed, you're ruining our family. No, Emma, I pressed my forehead to the door. I just stopped funding it, Jake interjected, angry and hurt. I need to pay for the truck, Kim. I'm going to lose it. You should have thought of that before you called me greedy, I said, and there was no tremor or pity in my voice. Mom started crying out loud, with a throb, as if she wanted the neighbors to hear. Sandy, we're your parents. You can't just erase us from your life. Look at me. I took a step back and realized that if I opened the door, I'd fall back into my old role as guilty, obligated, responsible for everyone, so I went upstairs, turned on the music, and forced myself to sit at the computer. They knocked, begged, called my name, for 30 minutes, an hour, maybe more, then they fell silent. The next few days were surprisingly calm. I got up, went to work, talked to clients, took inventory of new items, and appreciated the smell of old books and the rustle of wrapping paper. Everything seemed cleaner, the air freer, Even my thoughts flowed more smoothly. Sometimes I caught myself no longer anxiously checking my bank statements, they belonged to me now. Strangely, there was something liberating about that silence. On Friday, around lunchtime, I was sitting in my office reviewing sales reports when my assistant knocked on the door. "Sandy," she said quietly, "your parents are here, they say they need to talk." I let out a tired sigh. The last thing I wanted was a scene in front of my clients. "Let them come into the office," I said. A minute later, they entered. Mom looked exhausted, her eyes red and shadowed, as if she hadn't slept for several nights. Dad was more reserved, but his expression reflected the same fatigue, hurt, and confusion. "Can we sit down?" he asked. Of course, I gestured to the chairs across from the desk. "Just hurry, I have a lot to do." Mom immediately began to cry. "Sandy, we were wrong," she said, swallowing back tears. "Asking you for all these gifts, it was too much. We talked, discussed everything, and decided we'd settle for less." "Less?" I asked, and something tugged at my heart, hope that maybe they understood. Dad nodded. "Yes, we decided we only needed one thing, either a trip to the Maldives, or a new car, or diamond earrings. You can choose whatever's easiest for you." I stared at them for a few seconds, not believing I was actually hearing this, then I just burst out laughing, quietly at first, then louder, until tears came. The laughter burst forth, as if something inside me had finally broken, not anger, not pain, just pure amazement at the absurdity of humanity. Mom frowned. "Why are you laughing?" But I couldn't stop. I laughed so hard I had to press my palms to my face. It was all too absurd, too instructive, too real. They looked at me as if I'd suddenly lost my mind, as if the words I'd spoken were something utterly impossible to comprehend, something so alien to their world that it took them a moment to realize I was serious. Dad frowned, blinked a couple of times, and asked with that icy calm he always used to hide his irritation, "What's so funny, Sandy?" I wiped my eyes, because I'd laughed so hard I cried, and, catching my breath, I said quietly but firmly, cutting each word apart as if severing the invisible threads that bound me to their eternal expectations. "You still don't understand, Dad. I'm not buying you anything, not a trip, not a car, not earrings, nothing." Mom, as if rehearsing an old play, theatrically pressed her hand to her chest and whispered tragically, "You're breaking my heart, Sandy." "Mom," I looked straight at her, not breaking eye contact. "I paid your medical bills for years. I know your heart is fine, but mine isn't. Mine is tired, and in case you haven't noticed, I've supported you all, year after year, while you took it for granted. That's enough. From this day forward, I'm done with this." Dad coughed and shifted in his chair, as if trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "What about the anniversary dinner?" he asked carefully, as if offering a compromise. "We booked the restaurant, after all." "I cancelled the reservation," I replied calmly. "You can come up with your own party." Mom gasped, even covering her mouth with her hand. "Are you serious? You cancelled it? But we invited 30 people." "Then you better start planning something you can actually afford," I said. "Sandy, please." Her voice wavered, but I couldn't listen any longer. "No." I rose from the table, straightened, and looked down at them. "I want you both out of my office immediately, and don't you dare come to my office again." They stood up silently. Dad, his lips pressed together, led Mom to the door. As she passed, I heard her crying again in the hallway. The sounds echoed in my chest, but I didn't allow myself to waver. Over the next week, my phone became a besieged fortress. It rang during the day, it rang at night, sometimes 10 times in a row. Relatives, acquaintances, even people I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt a sacred mission to bring back reasonable Sandy. "Your Aunt Sarah says you're too cruel to your elderly parents," some said. "Kim, your cousin Mike thinks you should reconsider. After all, they raised you," came from another call. "Your parents are so upset," sighed a third. "It's all about money, right? You can afford to help, your antiques business is thriving." My responses were the same. Sometimes I simply hung up, Sometimes I remained silent until they realized they were talking to silence. I didn't care. I was tired of everyone feeling entitled to disregard my boundaries as if they were public property. 2 weeks passed. Their 40th wedding anniversary came and went, quieter than most weekdays. I heard nothing from them, and there was a strange, almost fragile peace about it. I even allowed myself to consider that maybe they really had decided to leave me alone. But the next day, curiosity, that old betrayal, finally got the better of me. I opened my laptop, logged onto social media, scrolled through my feed, and came across Emma's page. The photos showed an evening in my parents' living room, a few people, maybe a dozen. On the table were food in plastic containers, paper plates, a supermarket cake, cheap garlands from the dollar store, but their faces were cheerful, contented, as if no one had noticed the absence of waiters, white tablecloths, and expensive wine. Under the photo, Emma wrote, "Mom and Dad's small 40th anniversary celebration. Sometimes you have to be content with the fact that ungrateful people forget what family means." I laughed out loud, into the silence of the room. Ungrateful people, that's what it was. The irony tickled my gut. They weren't offended because I'd refused, but because I'd stopped being their bank. But to be honest, the photos were good. Mom and Dad were smiling, and so were the guests. No one looked unhappy. It looked like a normal evening at home, with the smell of casseroles, fairy lights twinkling on the walls, and an old record player playing something from their youth in the corner. And I suddenly thought that maybe this was exactly how it was supposed to be. No scenes, no expectations, no sense of duty, just them, their friends, and a little warmth, a real family celebration, paid for not with my daughter's credit card, but with my own efforts. 2 months had passed since that anniversary, and they were, without exaggeration, the most peaceful 2 months in the last few years of my life. I slept through the night, unawakened by alarming calls. I drank my morning coffee without thinking about bills or overdue rent. Business at the antique shop was going as smoothly as ever, and for the first time, I felt like everything around me belonged to me: the silence, the order, the peace I'd been deprived of for so long. I'd just returned home from a long, intense day, when everything felt as if life itself had finally decided to exhale along with me. In the past few weeks, I'd closed 3 major deals, and each one felt not just like a professional victory but like a quiet, internal confirmation that my struggles had not been in vain. One of the deals was particularly successful. I sold a complete Victorian dining set, all dark walnut, with carved legs and worn yet elegant chairs, to a California collector for $18,000. He said the set reminded him of his grandmother's house, and I suddenly thought how strange it is that the things I dig out of other people's basements sometimes become symbols of other people's memories. The extra money that had previously flowed thoughtlessly into the family abyss was now mine to keep. $5,000 settled in my account every month, and I could decide what to do with it: invest it back into the antiques business, expand my warehouse, update my website, or simply save it for myself, thinking for the first time in so many years not about the needs of others but about my own goals. It was a feeling I'd never known before, not even excitement, a calm, confident sense of control that I'd always lacked. That Thursday evening, I was returning home, tired but satisfied, when I noticed my parents' old Honda parked at the gate of my house. The engine was off, but the headlights were on, as if they were afraid I'd drive by and pretend I didn't notice. Inside, in the dim light, I saw their silhouettes. They sat next to each other, as if frozen in anticipation. My heart didn't flutter, just the familiar premonition of an unpleasant conversation. As soon as I pulled up and stopped the car, they got out. Almost simultaneously, Dad approached me first, his shoulders slumped, his face looking older than I remembered, and his eyes tired, as if the last few months had squeezed him from the inside. "Sandy, we need to talk," he said quietly, but with the same intonation he always used to begin requests disguised as important conversations. I opened the trunk, took out my bag, and without turning around, asked, "What do you want?" Mom came closer, clutching her old purse, the one I remembered from childhood. "We're in big trouble," she began, her voice shaking. "We can't pay the mortgage anymore. The bank sent a letter saying they're going to foreclose on the house." They both looked genuinely upset, but I didn't believe it. I'd seen those same eyes too many times when they needed something from me. Interesting, I said, closing the trunk and turning to face them. Because I've been paying your mortgage myself for the last few years, and if you'd been saving even a little bit like you promised, no bank would be threatening you now. Dad shook his head, as if I were speaking a different language. We didn't save that much, he muttered. Really? I raised my eyebrows, because $2,800 a month, multiplied by 3 years, is over 100,000. Where did all that money go? They exchanged glances, and I saw that anxious pause when they're both trying to decide which lie to tell. We had expenses, Mom said, trying to sound convincing, but her voice still wavered. What expenses? I stepped closer. I was also paying your medical bills this whole time. What did you do with your money? Sandy, please, Dad interjected, we'll lose the house. I crossed my arms, trying not to raise my voice. You know what? Even if you've spent every penny, you still have options. Remember that little house in the country I bought you 6 years ago? Their faces changed immediately, not fear, not surprise, but rather wariness, as if I'd suggested selling a family heirloom. So what? Mom asked, looking at me suspiciously. Sell it, I said simply. It's worth at least $80,000 now. That'll be enough to pay off the mortgage and keep your house. Dad immediately shook his head. We're not selling the country house. Then I guess you'll lose this one, I replied, trying not to shake with irritation. Sandy, this is our retirement home, he said. We were planning to move there when we were older. Well, I looked him straight in the eye. If you lose this house, you might have to move there sooner than you planned. Mom sobbed, her voice thin, almost childish. You can't just let us become homeless. I won't let you do anything, Mom, I said calmly. You make your own choice. Keep the country house and lose this one, or sell the country house and keep this one, but I won't pay your bills anymore. But we're your parents, Dad said quietly, as if that word would open all doors. And I've helped you for years, I replied, and you called me selfish. We're done. I walked past them, opened the door, and entered the house. I turned the key in the lock and heard the bolt creak. They stood on the porch, chatting for a few more minutes. Then the engine of their old Honda started, and the engine began to rumble quietly. In the following weeks, news of the family reached me through gossip. My cousin Lisa, the one whose mouth always worked faster than her brain, called to tell me the latest news, even though I hadn't asked. Emma got a second job, she said with the air of an informed witness. She works at a coffee shop on weekends to pay the rent. I grinned. Good job, I replied, at least he's doing something useful. And Jake, Lisa continued, is now working 2 shifts in a row at the warehouse. He says he's tired, but he's holding on so he doesn't lose the truck. That's what grown-ups do, I said calmly, feeling a strange, quiet satisfaction. And your parents, she added, lowering her voice as if sharing a state secret, are thinking about selling their country house. I smiled. Finally a smart move, I replied, ending the conversation and putting the phone down on the table. For the first time in years, I felt like my decisions were beginning to teach them something all my money couldn't. Lisa, I realized immediately, was hurt by something, perhaps by how calmly I'd taken all the news, or perhaps by the fact that I hadn't uttered a single dramatic "poor them," as was probably expected. Her voice was tinged with irritation when she asked, Sandy, doesn't any of this upset you? I stood by the window, watching the late sun set on the storefront glass, and slowly answered, no, I don't know. They're simply doing what they should have been doing long ago, taking care of themselves. After Lisa hung up, I stood motionless for a moment, listening to the silence in which I suddenly heard my own breathing, measured and calm, like after a long illness, when for the first time the body doesn't ache. I thought about her words, about this whole maelstrom my family and I had found ourselves in, and realized that for the first time in many years, none of us were on the brink of disaster. Emma had taken 2 jobs. Jake was working overtime. My parents had finally decided to sell the country house I'd once bought them and were planning to use the money wisely. without whims and theatrical resentments. No one was starving, no one was sleeping in the car, they just had to earn a living now, like the rest of the world. The truth was, I was allowing them to prey on my pity. Every time I transferred money, it was as if I were confirming their right not to be adults. I myself had taught them that there would always be someone who would sort everything out, who would pay the bills, plug the holes, take responsibility, and now they were finally facing reality, that simple but inevitable rule of life: what you have to earn. You have to choose what you can afford and what you have to give up, and this isn't a tragedy, it's growing up. Emma, probably for the first time in years, understood that work isn't a punishment, but an opportunity to become resilient. Jake, a stubborn, hot-tempered, but essentially kind boy, finally showed the determination I so sorely missed in him. My parents, old, stubborn, and proud, decided to move into a place they could actually afford, instead of pretending to be a respectable family on credit. Oddly enough, the very fact that I cut them off turned out to be, perhaps, the best gift I could have given them. Meanwhile, my business was thriving, and for the first time in a long time, I felt inspired rather than anxious. Without the constant drain of money on other people's needs, I could focus on my own business. I hired an assistant, a young woman with impeccable taste and a keen eye, who helped me sort my inventory and update my catalog. I invested in updating my website, expanded my online presence, and even began considering opening a second office on the coast, where there are always wealthy clients hunting for rarities. Autumn is a golden time for antique dealers. People begin redecorating their homes for the holidays, preparing for visits from relatives, sorting through old things, dreaming of warmth, comfort, candles, and silverware. I had to attend sales, evaluate new arrivals, seek out unique items, serve regular customers, and all of this filled me with a kind of old-fashioned joy in work, the kind that comes from working not out of fear, but out of love. One afternoon, while arranging vintage Christmas ornaments in the display case, delicate glass angels with wings, yellowed with age but still wonderfully clear, I heard the phone ring. A name appeared on the screen: Jake. Kim. His voice was uneven, as if he had rehearsed the conversation beforehand. I wanted to talk to you. I'm listening, I replied, carefully placing the porcelain reindeer figurine on the shelf. I know things aren't right between us, he said after a pause, but I want you to know, I don't blame you for stopping helping us. I must admit, I wasn't expecting that. Really? I asked, not hiding my surprise. Yes, it was hard at first, of course, we were all angry, me especially, but you were right, I was too lazy, just waiting for you to pay my truck bill, while I wasted it on all sorts of nonsense. I smiled, for the first time in our conversation, not out of irritation, but out of gentleness. How are you doing now? It's hard, he admitted, but I'm managing. I got a job delivering furniture on weekends, and now I earn even more than before. I just had to stop thinking that your help would always be there. I'm glad you realized that, I said quietly, feeling a warm, heavy feeling in my chest, like a lamp had been lit inside. Kim, he added after a pause, I'm sorry I called you selfish back then. You weren't selfish, quite the contrary, you helped us more than you should have. After he hung up, I stood there for a long time, holding the phone. I didn't cry, I didn't sigh, I just felt it, and this feeling, not relief, not pity, but pride, was unexpectedly strong. I was proud of myself for having managed to draw a line, and proud of him for finally finding the strength to rise. Maybe, I thought, this really will end better than I could have hoped. Maybe they'll all learn to stand on their own 2 feet, and maybe I can finally live my life, not looking back on the mistakes of others, but building the one I'd dreamed of all along. Jake's phone call was the first real conversation I'd had with anyone in my family since the whole anniversary disaster, and no matter how hard I tried to keep a straight face, something shifted inside me, as if a warm wind had blown from somewhere far away, reminding me that not all was lost. He was polite, calm, and for the first time in months, I heard respect, not irritation, in his voice. That call gave me that strange, quiet hope that maybe not all of them would be forever angry and resentful, that maybe sooner or later they would all realize I hadn't betrayed them. but simply allowed them to grow. A few weeks passed, and one evening Lisa called me. Her voice, as always, was a little tired and a little overly businesslike, as if she herself wasn't entirely sure why she was telling me the news, but she couldn't resist. "Kim," she said, "your parents did sell the country house." I involuntarily paused, coffee cup in hand. "And how much did they get for it?" "85,000, she replied, and I heard a hint of admiration in her voice, as if it were a personal achievement. It was enough to pay off the mortgage in full, and they even had a little left over. I smiled, not out of malice, not out of triumph, but because for the first time in years they had truly pulled themselves together. They were no longer in danger of losing their main home, and for the first time in a long time, I could say, they'd pulled themselves out of the hole. From Lisa, I also learned about Emma. It turns out she was still working 2 jobs, but by all accounts, she was starting to cope surprisingly well. Lisa even told me, with a kind of genuine respect, that Emma had gotten a promotion at her main job and was now earning more than when I was paying her rent. It sounded like a small miracle. My persistence, my abandonment of the constant rescue, had finally paid off. Autumn gave way imperceptibly to winter, and life returned to the rhythmic, confident flow I'd always wanted. My business was in a festive mood. December was traditionally the busiest month. People were looking for special gifts, unique items with a story, antique jewelry, Christmas figurines, china, silver, rare books, anything that carried a memory. I worked from morning until night, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel tired, only a pleasant tension, that sweet exhaustion when you realize you're doing something important, and every hour truly belongs to you, and not someone else. With each passing day, things improved, and I increasingly found myself thinking that I was ready for the next step. I began seriously considering a second location. In the historic district, right in the center of town, stood a building with huge windows and antique brickwork, the perfect showcase for a new store, and given the money I'd saved by stopping supporting my family, I actually had enough for a substantial down payment. This feeling of freedom, opportunity, confidence, was so rare that I almost didn't believe it. One evening, already in mid-December, I was staying late at the store, checking inventory, making lists, copying down prices, when I suddenly heard a soft knock on the door. We'd been closed for a while, the street outside the windows already immersed in the soft winter gloom, but when I looked out, I saw a familiar silhouette. Emma was standing at the entrance, wrapped in a scarf, holding a paper cup of coffee. I opened the door, let her in, and before I could say anything, she smiled, a little apologetically. "Hi, Kim, I hope you don't mind me stopping by without ringing." "Of course not," I said, feeling a little nervous. "How are you?" She glanced around the store, which by now was already fully decorated for the holidays, vintage glass ornaments, garlands of fir branches, display cases filled with antique candlesticks and angel figurines. Her gaze lingered on the display case where I'd recently displayed my porcelain doll collection, and something akin to regret flickered in it. "It's so beautiful here," she said quietly. "I've missed this place." I invited her to sit in one of the antique armchairs that stood by the fireplace and were up for sale, but, as usual, no one could bring themselves to buy them. She sank into the chair and, folding her hands in her lap, said, "I wanted to talk to you about everything, about what happened." I nodded, silently waiting for her to speak. "We treated you terribly," she finally breathed. "That whole anniversary thing, it was crazy. Mom and Dad kept demanding gifts, trips, and Jake and I kept goading them, calling you selfish." I didn't interrupt, let her talk. "I've thought about it a lot, especially now that I'm working 2 jobs, she continued. "I had no idea how much money you spent on us every month." "More than 5,000, I said calmly. She looked up, her eyes widening. "Oh, my God, Kim, I never thought about it in those numbers. I just knew you were paying my rent, but when you add it all up, it's a lot of money. You could buy a house, go on vacation, save for retirement." "That's right," I said, "you could." She shook her head, and something tender, almost childish, crept into her voice. "I'm ashamed that it took me to this point to understand how we used you." The main thing is that you understand, I replied, you're now self-sufficient. Emma smiled, tiredly but sincerely. It's actually kind of nice, she said. Of course, it's hard, but I feel grown up, I guess, real. And how are Mom and Dad? I asked after a pause. They're fine, they sold the country house, like you said, Dad grumbled, but Mom convinced him it was better than losing everything. They have everything under control now. Dad got a job as a consultant at his old company. Mom does bookkeeping for several companies. They work, Kim, they really work. I looked at her, and something in my chest fluttered, not pity, not guilt, but pride. They were finally living their lives. We talked for another hour, though it seemed as if time stretched between cups of tea and quiet pauses, breathing the past, heavy, awkward, yet still alive. Emma spoke with a sparkle in her eyes, about the promotion she'd achieved without anyone's help, about her new apartment with its windows overlooking the park, where the morning light turned the walls pink, as if the house itself were smiling at a new beginning, and about how she, the same girl who once spent everything without thinking, was now learning to budget and saving with a kind of proud rigor. I listened and felt some old, frozen resentment gradually release within me. As she was about to leave, she stopped in the doorway and turned to me. Her eyes were tired but honest. Kim, she said quietly, as if afraid I'd close in if she spoke any louder, I know we've messed up a lot. I'm not asking you to just forgive and forget, but I hope that someday we can be sisters again, real sisters. Not just sisters who transfer money and pretend to be close. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel irritation, just a deep, slow tenderness. I'd like that too, Emma, I replied. After the door closed behind her, I was left sitting in the shop, surrounded by antique lamps, porcelain, and mirrors in carved frames, where my face was reflected, calm, soft, a little tired, but in its own way content. For the first time in years, I felt like everything was in its place. My family had finally learned to stand on its own 2 feet, my business was booming, and I could afford to simply live, without the constant fear that someone else's mistakes would become my problems again. A week later, I signed the lease for the second store location. The papers smelled of fresh ink and hope, as if life itself had stamped it. You did it. When I left the lawyer's office, the air was cool, October, and it felt like the beginning of something new. At that moment, the phone rang. Kim, Jake's voice was unexpectedly cheerful, almost joyful. Emma told me you're opening a second store. That's amazing. Thank you, I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I'm thrilled myself. He paused, then added, a little awkwardly, I wanted to ask, are you hiring? I'm thinking about changing careers. I've always been drawn to antiques. I even stopped on the sidewalk. Want to work for me? If only you'd agree. I know I've often acted foolishly in the past, but I've been rethinking a lot of things lately. I don't expect any special treatment. I just want to try, to prove that I can be useful. I listened and remembered how he'd ruined everything before, with his endless promises, his irresponsibility, and how I'd then had to clean up the mess. But I also remembered his hands, deft, careful, able to bring life back to things others had already considered lost. I'll think about it, I said. I really need someone to restore my furniture. I'd be happy to, he replied, and, Kim, I don't want any discounts because of my family, just treat me like any other worker. When I hung up, my chest suddenly felt lighter, almost luminous. My family had finally stopped seeing me as a purse string. We were learning to be equals, and even if it was just the beginning, it was still a beginning. I didn't know if we'd be able to fix things with Jake and my parents, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like it was possible. The main thing was, I knew I could handle it, even if it wasn't. I learned to set boundaries and maintain them, without giving an inch. I learned to choose myself, not out of selfishness, but out of maturity. My phone vibrated, a message from a client. He was interested in the Victorian wirework he'd seen on a website. I grinned, took off my gloves, opened my laptop, and once again immersed myself in what I did best, finding beauty in forgotten things, cherishing them, and sharing them with those who could appreciate them. That evening, as I closed the window, I looked at my reflection in the glass. at a woman who had finally ceased to be a shadow of others' needs. In that reflection, I saw not weariness, but quiet confidence. This Christmas was supposed to be different, not noisy, not ostentatious, but real, and for the first time, I knew for sure, it belonged only to me.